Welcome back. On your Do Now, I wanted you thinking about 1950s culture. Um, did you find any of it interesting and something you'd want to experience and learn more about? Hopefully, you did. You like something about it, the music, the fashion, the television, something that sort of sparked your interest that you would learn more about it. Today, we're going to be looking at the 1950s. We're going to talk some economics. Ultimately, our goal is to try and decide how good were the 1950s. So 1950 showed enormous economic success beyond any decade before or since. Right? The 1950s is sort of this peak of economic success for the United States. We call it the golden age of capitalism. It was really showing, the Soviet Union how good a country like ours can be economically. Every group across the board, any way you cut it, every region of the country, every demographic, old, young, different races, everybody saw on average an increase in wealth. People could afford houses, cars, big families, and only one parent working. Like a single income house could afford all these things. Um, Really not something we have today. Right? Nowadays, it's hard to afford those things with both parents working. Right? So the 1950s is a very different time economically. This graph shows sort of the real wages. So take out inflation, take out the rise in prices and how that works. If we just measure how much could you buy with your money, you can see, well, 1950s people are averaging 20 something dollars an hour, where today they're averaging in like the 12 or 13. Right? So their income was almost double what our income is today when it came to what you were able to afford. And yesterday we talked about the cultural boom with TVs, movies, music, fashion, all that. It also came with a baby boom. Lots of kids are going to be born during the 50s and some of the years before and after. We call these kids baby boomers. Um, and it created this huge generation of kids um, who became very influential in the world throughout, civil rights movement, protests, Vietnam War, economics. All that is very influential because it was just a huge group of kids. It was a huge generation. Here's a graph showing you sort of that big boom in the number of kids that were being born during that time. While all this good stuff happened, we need to remind ourselves that this was a time of segregation, racism, discrimination, also sexism, and how women were treated and the expectations around of what women could do. It's also a time of war and threats, potential World War III, Korea happened, all this stuff. And there's a lack of freedom of expression. Like, you couldn't say or do whatever you wanted. There seemed to be, although the government didn't always control this, there was a lot of societal pressure to act and behave a certain way. But America has this love affair with the 1950s, as this was this perfect time in American history, and there's tons of movies and television shows and all about the 1950s. We just sort of romanticize it, including this TV show called Happy Days from the 1970s and 80s. Um, and our question for today is is this real? Is this really what the 50s were? Were the 50s really these happy days where things were just better? What you're going to do today is you're going to look at lots of different sources, lots of different perspectives on the 1950s. These are all recaps of stuff we've learned about. None of this is brand new. But you're going to see a picture, you're going to see a graph, you're going to see a summary of one of the issues of the 1950s, and you're going to have to analyze these different perspectives. The goal is tomorrow on the test, you have to answer the question, were the 1950s really happy days?